Hi, everybody. Lori Goldman with For the Sake of the Argument. Thanks for joining us today. I had Attorney General Dana Nessel on. I'm not going to recap for you. Sometimes you're going to have to do shit yourself. Keep listening and keep watching. I'm on all social media platforms. If today doesn't either stuff you up or make you go with diarrhea for the next 2 weeks, I don't know what is. You should be afraid and you should be motivated to do more because we are not only here in Michigan, but all over our country, if we don't all get off our collective fat asses and do something. Have a nice day, and please watch again. Welcome, Attorney General Dana Nessel. You know you're one of my favorite people.
Thank you. That is very kind of you, Lori. You're one of my favorite people.
Well, I'm not being kind. There are plenty of people that I wish I had not supported. And there are plenty of people that I don't think deserve to be where they are on both sides of the aisle. But you have upheld your position beautifully, so kudos to you. But enough of the accolades. Can you explain to our audience what a typical day as Michigan's Attorney General looks like?
I don't know that there really is anything that I can describe as a typical day. I will tell you that my days look very different now than they did, say, last year. So much of my time is monopolized by, trying to counter some of the very damaging federal actions taken by the Trump administration that, were it, another presidency, I probably would be out doing, consumer protection presentations and talking about our opioid relief funding and things that I did quite a bit. Now, we have multiple meetings every week with all of the Democratic AGs. And obviously, each and every day we await whatever fresh hell is coming down from D.C. And so much of my time, instead of being out on the road and traveling and talking to people, I'm in my office. And we are reviewing executive orders, we are doing legal research, we are drafting briefs and complaints, and waiting to see what the courts do.
So this is what is at the forefront, I think, of many Michiganders' minds, what's coming down from the Trump administration. You've sued his administration multiple times.
Well, 32 times so far and counting.
Do you feel like it's a firewall? Do you feel frustrated, or do you feel like you're going to keep doing it because it is making a difference?
I will say this. I hope it's making a difference. And if I'm not doing this, then what am I doing as Attorney General of this state? When I ran initially, as you'll recall, in 2018, Trump was in office then, and I ran to fight back against trespasses against the people of the state of Michigan by our federal government. And we were quite successful in doing that. We won over 80% of our cases. Now, did I expect I was going to have to do it again in my second term? Candidly, no, I did not. But you know what? Here we are. And to me, it's simply my job to do this. And we have, at this point, we have allowed $1.8 billion with a B, to come into our state that was illegally withheld from the Trump administration, or money that is now been preserved that otherwise would have been taken from us. And again, that is our money. Those are our tax dollars that were illegally, withheld from us. So far, from our 32 lawsuits, we've not outright lost any of them, but in about a dozen, we have received preliminary relief in that, money that was withheld illegally from the state of Michigan now has come into our state coffers, or the cases are continuing on the merits. So I think they've been incredibly successful as a whole. Unfortunately, some of these cases, we are seeing that once they get to the Supreme Court, a stay that had been put in place by a lower court is released, which means some of the very bad and damaging impacts of whatever that federal action was go into effect instead of being, paused by the court. And then, that is very concerning to me. But, I could say this, for the Democratic AGs, we're doing all we can. We are trying our hardest to preserve our democracy and the rule of law. And I think that none of us are going to stop as long as we hold these offices. And I had a lot of thinking to do after the election last year. Like many people, who supported Vice President Harris, I was devastated and I was really concerned. And I knew in my heart that a second Trump administration would be far more damaging than the first. That was very predictable to everyone, especially given the immunity decision that came down from the Supreme Court, which basically indicated to Trump, you can do whatever the hell you want, and nothing's going to happen to you from a legal perspective. But I thought, even though this would be a very dangerous time for a lot of us in elected office, we pushed back too hard, that either I had to stay in this office and do my job and do it right, or I should just resign and not do it at all.
Has Trump or any of his henchmen reached out to you in any way, positive or negative, or been tweeting about you in any way like they do with Tish James in New York?
Yeah, I haven't seen, I had President Trump tweeted about me a few times in his last administration. He has not done so at this point, fortunately. But I will say this, we can see very clearly that the way the Trump administration is utilizing the Department of Justice and the FBI is that it's being used to reward political allies and friends and to punish political enemies. And that's why you've already seen, whether it's Tish James, whether it's Adam Schiff or John Bolton, or the list goes on, people who have stood up to Donald Trump are paying the price now. And people who are his allies, whether it's the January 6 defendants, whether it's Eric Adams, whether it's the many others who have supported Trump many times financially in a direct, quid pro quo, and all of a sudden they get a pardon, a commutation, or their case is not investigated, or it's just dismissed and, while it's been pending. So that is a scary thing. And I will say, I think we have only just seen the beginning of Donald Trump's retribution tour.
That's terrifying, but I think you're right. You recently pushed back super hard against DTE's massive intent to increase rates. You've said you've attempted to say 75% of that should go away with this recent consumer rate hike. Can you tell us more about what your office is doing to take on powerful corporations that are trying to milk us?
Well, one of the things that you learn the hard way in Michigan is because of the system that we have in place, very unfortunately, the utilities, they have paid and bought practically every elected official in this state. And it's why we have some of the worst service of any state in the country, and why our rates are so incredibly high. And until or unless, consumers and DTE are not permitted to make political contributions, we're not going to see an improvement because there's no incentive. There's an automatic rate of return that comes to these utility companies, irrespective of how badly they perform. And it's really concerning. I have fought back and intervened every single time that the utilities have tried to raise our rates since I took office. And we've saved, consumers and ratepayers in this state, billions of dollars in doing so. But I think it's clear. You really, when I said when I ran for this office initially that, I know AG normally stands for aspiring governor. Lots of my colleagues, my former colleagues have gone on to become governor. But I knew in my heart that if I was to push back as hard as I planned to do against the utilities, it meant that I probably could never run for governor because those utilities would bury me. I mean, they give millions and millions of dollars to gubernatorial candidates, AG candidates, of course, everybody in the legislature. And it's been really damaging to consumers in our state. And I'm very hopeful that we'll see some changes made. And I will say, obviously, there's a ballot proposal on this very issue. Unless that proposal is successful, I think we're just going to see more of the same. But until I'm out of this office, I'm going to keep fighting.
So I take it you support the ballot proposal to keep dark money out of politics in Michigan.
I will say this because our department may have to, at some point, take a position on this. I'm not going to take a position on this particular ballot proposal. But can I say more broadly that I support getting the utilities out of the political contribution business? Yes, generally speaking, I do.
I think that's fabulous. Now, AG, you've called out Trump's illegal occupation of D.C. You've defended trans health care as the Trump regime has bullied U of M to stop gender-affirming care for anyone under 19. And you've defeated Trump's assault on reproductive rights right here in Michigan. When Trump and his allies keep trying to intimidate the state, what can you tell Michiganders like me and all the people listening who feel like they're constantly under attack? We know you're there to protect, but what can you tell us to make us feel like it's not a losing battle?
That's the thing. It wouldn't be a losing battle if we could all come together in defiance and in opposition to these, illegal and reckless and flagrantly illegal acts by the Trump administration. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing more often than not is people obeying in advance. People who just decide that it's easier just to succumb to whatever it is that the Trump administration wants rather than fighting back, even though so much of the time these are winning fights in the courts. And so whether you have a situation where, say, the big three, right, our auto manufacturers, they didn't want to go to court to fight back against the tariffs that were illegally imposed. And many of my sister states did file a case involving the tariffs. I didn't join that case. Why didn't I join? Well, in part because I couldn't get the backing of any of the auto manufacturers. I couldn't get the backing of the UAW. And there weren't those companies that were willing to create declarations to allow us to become part of that lawsuit. Well, you know what happened in that case?
No.
My sister states and the companies that did fight back, they're winning in the courts. They won at the district court level. They won at the Court of Appeals. This is now going to the Supreme Court. But my point is, sometimes, you have to fight back, and you can't win a case you never file. But if you're too afraid to even be part of the resistance or the opposition to something that you know is wrong and you know is illegal, then that's just going to embolden Trump. And whether we're talking about the universities who have done that, the law firms that have capitulated, and many others, it's deeply concerning because, the only way we know we're going to lose is by not fighting at all. And I look at the situation with the healthcare providers, whether it's U of M or my understanding is, and I think it's going to happen soon, that many of the other healthcare systems are also just going to fold. And even though there is no law that says that, healthcare providers cannot perform gender-affirming care or provide gender-affirming care in the way of puberty blockers or hormones to transgender youth, obviously the guidance of physicians, the guidance of, endocrinologists and psychologists, and of course their parents, knowing that this is what is best for those children, this is the treatment they need to be able to live healthy lives and to ensure that they're not taking their own lives, which is unfortunately something we see all too frequently with transgender youth. Instead of doing that, these hospital systems, instead of abiding by the science, are just bowing to political pressure, even though, again, there's no law that says they cannot provide this care. And in fact, just to the contrary, we do have a law in the books called Elliott Larson that says you cannot discriminate against someone based on gender identity. So if you're providing this care to cisgender youth, you can't deny gender-affirming care to transgender youth. So it's not just that there's no law that says you have to stop, but there is a law that says that if you do, you're discriminating illegally and unlawfully. And I guess my problem is, if you're afraid that, you're going to lose Medicaid funding illegally, take it to the courts. Sue. Why are you just bending a knee just because that's what Donald Trump wants? And where does it end? First, it's gender-affirming care for youth. Then it's going to be gender-affirming care, for adults. Then it's going to be birth control or any form of abortion, no matter how medically necessary it is. Then it's going to be PrEP or any kind of treatment for HIV. And then from there, vaccines. And it's just going to go on and on and on. And there's never a point where you're really satisfying the Trump administration. There's no okay, this will be the last thing we have to do, and then they'll leave us alone. And that's what the law firms found the hard way, right? They capitulated right in the beginning. And first it was okay, first it's just going to be you want 1,000 hours of pro bono services. But then the next day it's something else, and the week after it's something else, and it just goes on and on and on. And if you just would have fought them in the courts in the first place, you would have won. And that's what I find to be so disheartening, all the people that are obeying in advance, even though they know that it's unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it's deeply damaging to our democracy.
I don't know if you can answer this, if you have the answer, but in the last 10 years, when myself and a lot of people I know became more awake to what was happening in our government and our place to determine what government was going to look like for us in Michigan, we've learned that we can reach out to our legislators when we thought we didn't have a right, that we can help elect people that espouse our views, our morals. However, what do we do as regular citizens, regular voters, regular taxpayers, when the auto companies, when the colleges, when the institutions within Michigan puss out and don't do what they should and stand up on behalf of all of Michiganders?
Well, I think it's a matter of really telling those electeds, here's what we expect from you. And if you do the right thing, we're going to support you. Please know that we want you to do the right thing. We expect you to do the right thing, and we will support you when you do it. And I think that all too often you have people they're just afraid because they see polling out there that seems to suggest that, if they do a certain thing, then it'll be viewed negatively. And I think it's important that we stand up and say, sometimes there just is right and wrong, Lori. I mean, sometimes there is. I look at what's happening right now with our immigrant communities and taking a person who just happens to be from another country and without due process, throwing them into a detention camp or shipping them off to another country that they're not from and putting them into a let's just call it what it is, not just a maximum security facility. These are concentration camps. People who have never committed a crime, but for the fact that they may be in this country illegally. It's wrong. It's wrong on every level to be treating people like this. And I looked back during the time period in the 1940s where we took Japanese American citizens, and threw them into detention camps. And this was something that was actually wildly popular during that time period, even though it was horrendous and disgusting and terribly wrong. And I guess what I'm asking for members of the Democratic Party, I would hope that Republicans would do this as well.
Yes.
Stand up and say, this is wrong, this is intolerable. And to push back as hard as possible while you still can. And I remember being up on Mackinac Island back at the end of May, beginning of June, whenever it was. And I was having meeting after meeting after meeting. These weren't meetings where I was, fundraising for my next office. These were meetings to sort of beg and plead with stakeholders to start pushing back and to start formulating a plan. And what I said to those people at that time was this: if we wait too much longer, pretty soon we're going to see the military on our city streets. It's not if that's going to happen, it's when. And I remember having a labor leader who I spoke to say, well, we're planning on something big for Labor Day, which of course we just, passed a weekend ago. And I said, Labor Day? I go, if you wait that long, it's going to be too late. And I mean, again, I'm not Nostradamus, but everyone could see this was coming. And now we have the military in our streets in Washington, D.C., and before that, Los Angeles, and any minute now, Chicago. And we're normalizing activities that were never in a million years something that we could imagine before Trump retook power. But when I walk around my little community in the suburbs of the city of Detroit, I look around and it looks like everything is just normal, even though I know that really nothing is normal about what's happening in this country. And it may never be normal again. And unless we stand up collectively together and we fight back as hard as we possibly can with all the fervor we can muster, I'm afraid that we will be a full-blown autocracy in the blink of an eye. It's already happening. And for people who are in elected office, we can't just look the other way and pretend this isn't going on because we're on the cusp of losing everything.
In May of this year, your office dropped the charges against pro-Palestine protesters at the U of M. Can you explain why the charges were initially brought and why you eventually dropped them?
There were so many complaints that were coming in from the U of M campus during that time period. And there were activities that were, again, not First Amendment protected activities. And I was asked to take a look at many of the cases. We reviewed dozens of incidences that had occurred on the university. And that included many things. Some of it included activities on the DIAG. Some of it included activities that had occurred at the Art Museum. Others at, the commencement ceremonies, or the honors commencement ceremony was one of them, or graduation. And in the vast majority of those cases, we did determine that it was First Amendment protected speech. But some of these activities were actually criminal in nature. And when our department was asked to look at it, I said we would. And my department, where we saw criminal activity, we charged. We tried very hard to have those cases proceed. Again, nobody's charged with anything but very, probationable, I will say, offenses. But despite the fact that we presented all of the evidence, we could not get the district court judge to make a ruling on whether to bind the cases over or not. And he continued to have hearing after hearing on unrelated matters. And finally, between, the amount of time, energy, and effort that it was taking on these very, very low-level cases, and the fact that the judge seemed to not be interested at all in just doing the one thing that a district court is supposed to do, which is making a decision on whether to bind the cases over to trial or not, I made the difficult decision to dismiss those cases because it was simply eating up a lot of resources for my staff, and we could not seem to convince the judge to issue a ruling on the case.
But students have always been a part of protest movements throughout the American history. Where's the line? That's, I guess, what is hard. And there are people on both sides that agree or disagree. Where's the line where students can put forward their protest without penalty of being arrested or charged with a felony?
Lori, I have been protesting myself since I was a student at the University of Michigan when I was 18 years old. And I have gone to protest after protest after protest. And there's so many different ways that one can protest legally. You don't have to fight the cops in order to make your voice heard. And so I have never once been ticketed or arrested. When I protest, I make sure that I'm doing so in a lawful way, and that if a permit is required, that we seek a permit. And I think that we've made some really substantial changes as a result of some of the protesting that I've been involved in. But if you decide to protest in a manner that is illegal, then that's called civil disobedience. And, if you break the law, you understand that there is some penalty associated with that. And maybe you use that to, illustrate how strongly you feel about that particular topic, but you can't do it without consequence. And again, no one is saying that people shouldn't have the opportunity to protest. You just have to do it within the boundaries of the law. And that's what I say all the time. I am out there constantly since Trump retook power at protests. And I've been to protests in city after city, county after county, but I've always done so in a lawful, legal manner. And I had no problem making my voice heard, whether that was before I was in elected office or now as Attorney General. And that is why I advise everybody, protest lawfully and legally, and you'll have many opportunities to do that. And if you decide not to do that, just understand that there is a legal consequence to be paid.
Next year, 2026, is your final year as Attorney General, two-term Attorney General. What's one thing you'd want to tell the next Michigan AG, regardless of party, a piece of advice that you've culled from these 2 terms that you've served almost?
If you are going to poll test every issue, you're never going to be very good at this job. And you're never going to do the work as well as you need to in order to properly serve and protect the public. Being a prosecutor is not always very popular. And I will say this, and I will just look at my public integrity investigation and public corruption investigations. You never know where they're going to lead. But sometimes you have to push back, and you just have to be centered and focused on doing what you know to be the right thing, and not always just to do what's popular, and not always just to do what will make you popular even within your own party. And like I said, I mean, there are so many investigations that I've been involved in where when you start it, you do not know where it's going to go. But you have to do this job in a manner in which people believe and understand that you are trying to protect the public and you are trying to protect our system of governance and to make sure that you are rooting out corruption, and you're doing it without fear or favor. That's what this job requires. If you are becoming Attorney General because you see it as a stepping stone to another position, then you're never going to be very good at this job.
You know what? I have to agree with you. I hear from a lot of people every day, every week, and the one thing that people say about you, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, whether they like you or they don't, is that they respect you and they like how you go after wrongdoing, whether it's Republican-inspired, Democrat-inspired, or just, vanilla ice cream. It doesn't matter. You go after people that are doing bad deeds that affect us in Michigan, no matter what, no matter who supports them, no matter where they come from or where they're going. And I think that is why I gave you that little love bombing at the beginning. I think that is the highest compliment that an electorate can give to an elected official, is that they respect you.
Well, to be fair, I love vanilla ice cream. So I have no plans to investigate or prosecute in any way, shape, or form
Well,
at this
as a
point.
woman, I guess as long as you never look like you like it, it'll be okay. You have yet to announce if you're running for higher office. I get asked this question: what's Dana Nessel going to do next?
I'd also like to know the answer to that question. And I'm not trying to be coy, and I know it presents that way. I have grave concerns about what the future is going to be for those of us that have been so vigorous in our opposition to the Trump administration. And when I say that, I know, again, it's only a matter of time before Trump and his henchmen and women will go after everyone and anyone who has been too defiant in their opposition to him and his policies. And I know I'm definitely not number one on the list, or 2 or 5 or even 10, but I think the Democratic AGs, if we remain so defiant and so aggressive in our work against the administration, that, there's a target on each of our heads. So I don't know what the future holds for me, and firstly, I don't know if it's fair to the people of this state if I'm spending time, doing, making phone calls and trying to figure out what's the next thing that I'm going to do, and it interferes with this incredibly important job that I'm doing right now. To me, the most important job that I could possibly be doing right now, which is being Attorney General of the state of Michigan. So I don't want to interfere with that. And on the other hand, I truly believe for many of us that we are going to be persecuted by the DOJ and who knows who else. And so it's hard for me to wrap my mind and wrap my brain around what am I going to do in 2027 when I honestly think for some of us we'll be fighting court cases or in federal prison or in a detention camp without proper due process. I do think that is what the Trump administration has in store for us. And so it's just very hard for me to think about what my future will hold without the recognition that it might hold some really ugly things for me and many others.
Well, that's a heavy answer, and I wish I could say I disagreed with you. It seems almost fucked up to go on to our lightning round now, because I think I want to go in a corner and cry, because you're right, and people better wake up to the fact that you're right. But now we have the end, and young people write these lightning round questions.
Okay.
So don't be ashamed. Don't be afraid if you don't know what the fuck they're talking about, because I always have to ask them, what does this mean? What's your hot take, Dana Nessel? Do you know what that means?
I mean, does it have to do with the hot cakes? Because if so, I love them. I don't.
No, it's hot take.
Okay.
It's like an opinion you hold that is unpopular, and maybe it's not that big of a deal, but you still hold it.
Oh, got it. 90 Day Fiancé is the most culturally relevant program of our time.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. And if you watch it, it'll make you feel better about your own life choices.
Okay. All right.
So I highly recommend it. Again, I get paid nothing by the TLC channel to endorse this show. All I know is that when there are times that you literally have to completely turn your brain off because you feel like you're melting down, you watch this show and you say, you know what? My decisions are not nearly as bad as the people on this television program.
I love it.
The end.
I love it. Okay. You can only have one of these two things: Lions winning the Super Bowl or the Wolverines taking another national title. Which do you pick?
I got to go with the Lions because, of course, I got to have the incredible experience of watching my Michigan Wolverines win the championship, and that was amazing. But it's been, well, always that the Detroit Lions haven't won a championship or a Super Bowl. And I think it's about time now. I did watch the Green Bay game last night, and I'm not feeling super confident based on what I saw. But hope springs eternal, and I've always been a Lions fan and always will be. And I think that makes me just an absolute masochist on like a very, very significant level. But I love my Lions, so here's
Go
rooting for 'em.
Lions.
Go Lions.
You may have already answered this in the hot take, but how do you relax after fighting the Trump administration and criminals all day?
Yeah, it's by watching the dumbest TV I possibly can. I also appreciate a good documentary about cults. I don't know why, but it just makes me feel better overall about, again, my life choices.
Okay. Maybe because we have a cult administration right now. What's one case that you've encountered while you're Attorney General, or maybe even in private practice, that keeps you up at night?
I would say the case that I'm most concerned about is our case against RFK Jr. in the Department of Health and Human Services, where we have tried so hard to stop him from dismantling the agency, and specifically the CDC. Lots of other things that happen when you break them, you can put the pieces back together, even though it might be a long slog to do that. But, once Ebola has run rampant across our country and, hundreds of thousands or millions of people are bleeding to death out of their eyeballs, there's no really putting that genie back in the bottle, right? So that is the case that I think about the most. And I do see suddenly a little bit of pushback coming from the Republicans who are like, holy cow, we're all going to die. Understanding that there is no amount of wealth that can insulate you against an infectious disease. And my hope is that before it's too late, before we see the next global pandemic, we'll be able to do something about it. But at this point, I'm very fearful. To say I'm very concerned is kind of like a Susan Collins-esque statement. I'm terrified is a better way to put it.
I'm terrified too. In fact, I don't know if you're my 7th, 8th, 9th person that I've interviewed, but you have terrified me more than anyone else because you're talking about real things, real issues, real threats to those that we love in our country and ourselves and our beloved state. So thank you for that. Not really. Last question. Any advice for young attorneys or students in law school right now who see these legal battles unfolding that will impact us for years to come? What would you say to people that are going to be the next wave of defenders?
Get out there and make sure that you're doing something meaningful. We still have a justice system at this point. It is breaking quickly, but it is not completely irrelevant at this point. And so we need to have as many people as possible who are studying the law, who understand the law, and who are standing up for the rule of law and making their voices heard and talking to as many people as possible about what they're seeing and why this is not the way that our justice system ought to be operating. If people ever doubted that the courts were important, I hope they don't think so at this point. And there are things that we can do to fight and push back in the courts. And we just need as many allies and advocates as possible to do the heavy lifting, to do the hard work, and to make people understand that our democracy is worth preserving.
Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for being here today. I think we learned a lot, and I think it maybe inspired some of us, I hope, to get out there and help take on some of the burden that you're dealing with and your staff is dealing with. So thank you again, and go forward strong and brave, as you always do.
Well, I appreciate you having me, and I hope that your listeners and your viewers will take from this not just the type of fear that makes you want to curl up in the corner in the embryonic position and rock back and forth violently, but to understand that there still is time for us to fight back, but we're not going to have a chance that much longer, and we all have to coalesce together and do it as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Looking forward to hear what you're going to be doing in the future.
Thanks, Lori. Me too.